Welcome to another training segment on the couple checkup. My name is Dr. Peter Larson. I am a psychologist and a co-author of the couple checkup. In this session, we're going to look at an actual group summary report and walk through the PDF document a little bit, and I'm going to make some observations and make sure that you understand what is in the report and how to interpret that data. So as you'll remember from watching the segment on how to create a leader's account and generate a summary, you need a minimum of 5 couples to generate a group summary. And they need to be of the same stage. So 5 married couples, 5 engaged, or 5 dating. And of course that number can go quite a bit higher if you have more than 5 couples. But the reason you have to generate separate reports for different stages is that the content of the assessment is actually different for couples of different stages, and there's no way to really summarize data together in a report when it's different types of data. So this is a report that came out of a community-wide outreach in Florida, and it had over 1,000 married couples take the checkup. You can see there's an introductory page that explains a little bit about the checkup, a table of contents that just breaks down what's in the report. We're going to walk through the whole thing here in a minute, but you can see where all the categories are summarized. Now I'm seeing some things here on military deployment and military life. That tells me that in this sample there were military couples who were included, and so some of their data is also going to be summarized right alongside the standard data. Alright, let's keep walking through. This tells me about my group. Now it tells me this is a married sample, a married summary report of 1,163 couples. Now it was multiple groups. As you remember from the group leaders account tutorial, you can have multiple groups pulled into one summary report. You simply select those groups to be included in your summary at the time you're generating it. So this happened to take place through several Chick-fil-A store locations, and they each had their own voucher code that they were using and giving that out to couples. So you can see several store locations were included to pull these couples in to this summary report. Now this is going to tell me some of the scales that were used or that were delivered to couples. And let me say a little bit about this. Standard scales only. Well, everyone got some customizations here. So what's this life transitions? 167 couples, or 14% of the sample, had the life transitions scale. That means one or both of these spouses were over 55 years old. The checkup customizes some content for older couples, and so that tells me 14% of my sample were older couples. Emotional climate, 18%, or 211 couples. This is for couples who are married but don't have children. We have an extra scale in the checkup for couples without children. Intergenerational issues, 11% of the sample. These are couples who have children, but the children are over 18. So they get parenting questions and family questions that have more to do with having adult children and possibly aging parents. 44% of the sample had children. Remember, these are all married couples. So 44% of them had children, and at least one of the children was still under 18 years old. So they get a children and parenting scale of questions that is pretty standard for children and parenting. 25% of the married couples in this sample were in a blended family, had stepchildren. So that's significant to note that a full quarter of this sample that was really just recruited from the general public was living in a step family situation. This is kind of fun. 14 of the couples said they didn't have children, but they were expecting their first. And there is some content in the couple checkup for couples expecting their first child. And you can see 6 couples were preparing for deployment, 3 were currently deployed. So in these cases, a spouse um, entered into this community-wide initiative and must have had their deployed spouse take the checkup from wherever they were, which is certainly, because it's online, that's very possible to do. 9 of the couples indicated they were recently reunited after deployment, and 23 of the couples said they were active in the military, but deployment was not one of the current issues in their relationship. There are a lot of people serving in the military who are not necessarily being deployed, but they still have to deal with the stressors of military life. So the next page gives me a breakdown within the typology. Those of you who are trained in Prepare and Enrich know a little bit about the couple typology. These lines up here represent trends that we have seen through our research over the years. And what we have found is that while, the question is every couple unique, or might there be some real trends? And the research through cluster analysis has revealed that there really are some themes in the way couples relate. This top line is vitalized couples. They're very happy. They have high agreement scores, healthy agreement across most of the categories in the checkup. Harmonious couples are doing well. They feel good about their relationship. They're not quite as happy as the vitalized couples, but they're still in a pretty good spot. Conventional couples are more of the mid-range. See, we're talking about them as being somewhat satisfied, and they tend to do really well in spiritual beliefs, family, roles. They have room to improve in communication and conflict resolution typically. So teaching them those skills can really help them bump up to one of these higher levels. Conflicted couples are those who are struggling. They're not communicating or resolving conflict well. They're still doing okay in roles, but you can see they're just a step down from most of the other types. And then the couples who are in a crisis, the couples who are really struggling, are in the devitalized line here, the devitalized category, and they agree on very little. They feel that their communication, their conflict, their finances, their sex life, everything is really struggling at this point. They have a little bit of a better sense of roles, but even roommates can have good roles. You can live in very separate, disconnected relationship and still get the chores done. And really that's all that's happening for these couples. Now when you look at our sample, it's interesting to see about a third of the couples were feeling pretty good about their relationship. They're vitalized and harmonious. 23% fell into this conventional midline range. They're committed couples. Conventional couples have actually the lowest divorce rate in many of our studies. But they really need to learn these skills around communication and conflict resolution. Now this is the challenging part. 46% of this sample was conflicted and devitalized. And these were couples who decided to participate in a community-wide initiative run through Chick-fil-A. Many of them may have been encouraged to do this through their church, but many just were doing this because they were exposed to it right there in their community. And it's really sad to see that 46% of these couples were conflicted or devitalized. That's a lot of struggling marriages. So it's really a wake-up call. Now we do break down on some of these core scales in the checkup the percentage of couples that had this area as a strength, the percentage that had it as a possible strength, and the percentage that has that topic as a growth area. And this is a pretty dramatic graph, which you can see, 59% of these couples had communication as a growth area. Only 19% were feeling really positive about the way they communicated. Conflict resolution's even worse. 63% growth area, only 16% strength, 21% possible, kind of in the mid-range there. Finance shifts a little bit. They're doing a little bit better. 43% have that as a strength area, but still, over a third are struggling with financial management. So there's certainly room to improve there, but not as much of a need as you see in these two areas of communication and conflict resolution. Well, not surprisingly, sexual relationship is not faring well. We find that when couples are emotionally disconnected, if they can't communicate and can't resolve conflict, it's hard to foster a very connected physical relationship. So over half, 52%, rated their sexual relationship as struggling, and 28% found it a strength area. Now this is really dramatic. 74% rate their faith, their spiritual beliefs, as a strength, and only 15% as a growth area. And that is encouraging to see that couples feel good about their faith. That also tells me this was a relatively religious audience that responded. So as the churches in that community got on board and encouraged couples to take the checkup, they had a good response. But sadly, there's also a challenge here. This tells us that while their religious beliefs are high, they're having a hard time translating their faith into practice in terms of how they communicate and resolve conflict as a couple. It's one thing to profess your beliefs, but do you really display the patience, the self-control, the kindness and love that you profess in the way you communicate? So there's a challenge for churches here to help couples learn how to translate their beliefs into daily practice at home when no one's watching and you're tired and crabby and the kids are around. Are you still communicating and resolving issues in a productive manner? So that's the challenge, and it's a good challenge. It's good to see that clearly here. Now, as we keep going forward, you see some summary pages. We've talked about the typology, we've talked about the topics, the general topics. Now you're getting into some of the actual items. What were of all the statements in the checkup, where were the statements where there was the most agreement? Well, not surprisingly, these are all about pretty much all about faith. There's one item here around roles, consulting each other about decisions. But you can see 84% of the couples were agreeing on these items, 82, 78, 76. So from over 1,000 couples, that's a high level of agreement on these types of items. It tells you the issues where couples feel the best about their relationship. Now here are the top 5 couple issues. Only 18% of the time did couples feel good about some of these conflict resolution things. There's an item in the checkup that talks about, I usually end up feeling responsible for the problem. Now these are the paraphrased versions of the items in the checkup. But you can see here that conflict resolution is not going well. The vast majority of people are feeling blamed, feeling responsible for problems in their relationship. Here's a leisure activity item, the time and energy for recreation. Only 18% of the couples feel good about that. Here's a communication item, your willingness to share feelings. Only 20% of couples felt good about that. So 80% of the couples, one or both partners said, I wish my partner did a better job of sharing their feelings, of talking about what's really going on. Bringing differences to a point of resolution is a conflict resolution item. Most couples are not feeling good about that. 79% of them are not feeling good about that. Only 21% are. And the ability to ask for what you want is a communication and conflict resolution kind of item. It's an assertiveness skill, and you can see most people are struggling with that. Now we break it down further by what the men and the women are each saying. And this is kind of interesting. What you'll remember is there's the 5-point scale in the checkup. So you can strongly agree with something, which is a 5, or strongly disagree with an item, which is a 1. Well, here we've given you what was the average agreement level on these items. And again, here you see a lot of spiritual beliefs items scoring very high for both the men and the women. Okay, so their scores on that 5-point scale are averaging over 4. Now, what are the big issues the men are highlighting? You can see here their scores were averaging 2.8. on all of these items. They kind of all tied for the items with the lowest average score. And here we have conflict resolution item, here's 2 leisure activity items. They're the time and energy for recreation, having a similar idea of what is a good time. And then there's a sex item here for the men, saying, where they're concerned that their partner may have a different level of interest in sex. Now the women, again, scored high on spiritual beliefs. Now one of their items is a sex and affection item, where 4.1 average score on whether or not affection is used or refused unfairly. And the women were saying that they didn't feel that was the case, so they scored high on that item. It's ironic the men had a sexual item show up on the lowest in theirs, and the women had one show up pretty high in their relationship, in their scores. For the issues, you can see is communication stuff, bringing as a conflict resolution item here, bringing differences to a point of resolution, finishing household chores, time and energy for recreation, and this assertiveness item, the ability to ask for what you want. These were the things the women were most concerned about in this sample. Now, because there were military couples, and there were more than 5 in this sample, they did get some scales around stressors. If there's a military couple who's taking the checkup, they get an extra scale around personal stress in their relationship. And we have summarized that for the men and the women in these military couples. So the men, their biggest stressor was finances, time away from their spouse, feeling fatigued and tired, time away from their family, then their spouse themselves. So there's definitely some marriage tension here. And what you can see, the questions were, how often have these issues created stress for you in the last year, ranging from never to very often. Well, finances, almost 27% of these men in the military were saying very often are they stressed about their finances. The average score on this 1 to 5 scale was 3.29, and so this is what tells us what the biggest average stressors were for this sample of men in the military. 3.14 average on time away from your spouse, but look at a full 22%. We're saying that's very often a stressor in their marriage and in their life. Compare that to what the women in the military couples said. Their biggest stressor was feeling overweight or underweight, weight issues, feeling good about their health or their body. 26% said very often that's a stressor. 31% said often. So the women were concerned about this issue. And then we have something around chores and roles, things not getting done around the house. This was a major stressor. 29% of them said that's often. 24% said very often. They're also stressed about their spouse, their finances, feeling fatigued and tired. So you can see very clearly what some of these stressors that these military couples are facing, both the men and the women. Now here's a breakdown of a standard category in the summary report, communication. Now we remember from the earlier chart, communication was a growth area for 59%. This is another way to look at it here in this pie chart. 59% of this sample had communication as a growth area, only 19% as a strength, and 22% as a possible strength. Over here we show what were the items within communication. Remember there's 7 statements within each category. So the item with the most agreement, 44% of the time, was feeling listened to, and generally some satisfaction with how they talk to each other. The items with the greatest concern, the lowest level of couple agreement, were their willingness to share feelings and their ability to ask for what they want. Now we break it down by men and women. And again, you'll remember each of the items has a 5-point scale that they can respond on. And the item for the men with the highest satisfaction was feeling listened to. The item with the lowest satisfaction, the lowest scores, was their ability to ask for what they want. Okay. Also, their ability to share both negative and positive feelings scored quite low. The women felt, again, 3.3 is not a very high score here. Relatively speaking, their highest item of satisfaction was saying they don't refuse to discuss problems. They don't go out of their way to avoid issues. So they do try and discuss things. But their willingness to share feelings, ability to ask for what they want, these were some things that they're rating even lower in terms of their communication in their marriage. So the summary report breaks this down for conflict resolution, finances, you can see the different kinds of things, sexual relationship, it's broken down overall, and for the men and the women, what are they each saying? Spiritual beliefs, again, we can see here they scored quite high on spiritual beliefs, lots of agreement, feeling pretty good about that area. Leisure activities is one that kind of sneaks in here. Their time and energy for recreation. Only 18% of the couples felt good about that. So these are busy, stressed couples who feel like they don't have much time for one another. Really, that's a snapshot of what's happening in our culture. And both the men and the women were saying, they have a different idea of what a good time looks like. So one of the challenges for couples is to find shared activities that they both enjoy. Roles and responsibilities, again, busy, stressed people. You can see what the men and women were saying. They had the same concerns, whether or not you're too busy for household chores and finishing household chores. Just getting stuff done is hard. The men felt okay about how they consult one another on important decisions. That matches up with what the women are saying. Sharing household tasks. The women didn't feel quite as good about how household tasks are shared. They felt okay about some of the flexibility regarding roles and responsibilities, but maybe not quite as good about how the men were sharing in the actual household tasks. So let's keep moving here and see where we go. Here's the deployment stuff, preparing for deployment for those couples, returned from deployment, and then military life in general. You can see the item with the biggest concern is some of the moving and relocation requirements that military couples face, and there's just a lot of stress. And both the men and the women rated those items as the most stressful. They take pride in their service, and they feel good support from friends and family, but it is a stressful lifestyle to be in the military. You'll remember the couple and family map is a part of the checkup, and what we do in this section is we just show you the percentages from the whole sample. Where did couples fall on the map? And you can see that 32% fell right in the center, flexible and connected. That's a great spot to be. If we look over here, you can see 79% of the sample fell in this balanced level in the middle box. 13% is in the mid-range, which means they're balanced on one of the dimensions, but not both. So they're out here in these light gray areas. And then finally, you'll see that 7% are in the unbalanced area. So here we see a lot of couples, 6% of them are feeling very disconnected and inflexible in a rigid, disconnected relationship. These are more likely to be some of those devitalized couples. And then 1% is all the way up here in very flexible, overly flexible, and overly connected. So you kind of see this, how it breaks out, and you get this trend along this dimension here. As couples increase in closeness, they tend to increase in flexibility, and as they feel more and more disconnected, they tend to feel less and less flexible and more rigid as well. Some of the military couples are asked to rate how their relationship was prior to deployment, so you can look at that dimension as well. And the scope personality section is broken out by men and women, which is interesting to see, the breakdown. So 21% of the men scored high on the social trait, 21% extroverts compared to 18% for the women. And you can see 48% on both were average, and the women, there were a few more introverts. Openness to change. The guys were a little bit more open to change, 24% were high, only 27% low, compared for the women to 20% in the high range and 35% in the low range. The organized dimension flip-flops a little bit. 27% of the women scored high in the organized trait compared to only 18% of the guys. And 24% of the guys are low, 16% of the women. So the women in general and their personalities are rating themselves as being a little bit more highly organized and pursuing goals in their life. Now on the pleasing dimension, 32% of the women rated themselves high and only 20% low, compared to the guys, 23%. And emotionally steady. This one's dramatic. Only 11% of the women rated themselves high on this scale, and 38% of them rated themselves lower, compared to the men, only 20% low and 24% high. So this tells us that the women are certainly more in touch with some of those feelings, more expressive in their feelings, especially when they're under stress, if they experience some depression or anxiety, or even some anger in those situations. They're more likely to express that and feel that, whether it's external or internal, than the men are. So that's an interesting gender difference you see in this sample around personality. Finally, there's some ratings around the demographics. Every couple who takes the checkup answers some questions about their demographic background, so you can see age range, education level, average individual income, religious affiliation. You can see in this sample 75% were Protestant, 8% Catholic, 1% Jewish, a couple of Muslim couples participated, and then other or not answered breaks it down for you. The ethnic background, largely a Caucasian sample, although 10% almost were Hispanic, Latino, African American, Asian American, Native American participated. Average number of children was 2. Cluster here somewhere between 1 and 3 for most of the couples. We asked how long they dated, how long they were engaged, did they ever live together. You can see 57% said they never lived together. Number of previous marriages. So 75% of this married sample said they're in their first marriage. They've never been married before, but 25% in total have been married before, 1, 2, even 3 times. 5 of the people said they've been married 4 or more times. Okay, and how long have they been married? On average, you can see the biggest number here was 16 or more years, but there's another peak down here at 1 to 5 years. So it's a powerful way to break down the data. And there's some extra background on the military personnel and what their situation is, the branch, the rank, how long they've served, have they served in a combat situation, deployment questions. So you get a nice breakdown of the data. So that's a walk through the checkup summary report. You can tell there's a lot there. It would take a little bit of time to comb through that and get your highlighter and your pen out and mark it up and think about the group you're working with. It's a powerful way to understand them at a deep level. You can also see, however, that the confidentiality and privacy of the couples is protected. There's no names or information that identifies any one couple in the checkup summary report. And that's one reason that we keep it to a minimum of 5 or more couples to even generate a report. So that protects their confidentiality but gives you as a leader a lot of great information to go on. Thanks very much.